thank you everyone for your time and attending. It's my great pleasure to be moderating this session in the Inclusivity Lounge, which for the 4th consecutive year is participating in the Delphi Economic Forum. My name is Myrto Papathano. I'm partner with Athens-based Metavalon Venture Capital, and today we'll be speaking with women leading technology and innovation, and of course the investment gap that exists. It is my pleasure to welcome with us, first of all, Ms. Sevi Vasileva. Ms. Vasileva is the Vice President and General Manager for Greece, Cyprus, Malta, and Israel for Visa. She's one of the architects of the Visa Innovation Program and a strong advocate for empowerment of women and also the growth of SMEs through access to digital technology and also financial inclusion. Welcome, Ms. Vasileva. We have Dr. Rouchota, Dr. Martina Rouchota. She's the co-managing partner of a health tech startup BioMTech. She's also the lab director. She's the person that set up the first molecular imaging lab in Greece. And at the moment, they are facilitating preclinical studies and drug discovery through their technology for clients around the world. Welcome, Dr. Rouchota. We have with us today here Ms. Toutikyan. Ms. Toutikyan is an entrepreneur as well. Her latest startup is omgino.com and is focusing on the reproductive health of women. Throughout her career, she is a social entrepreneur and cultural producer with a background in human-centered service design and communication. Welcome. And also, last but not least, we have with us online Ms. Lee. Ms. Lee is the founder of WAM, and WAM is an initiative on the nonprofit sector to focus on increasing awareness on women's health issues, investing in women's health research, and implementing strategies to improve the inequalities and bias in research. She's an ex-entrepreneur herself, and her vision is to create the access to thought leaders, resources, and experiences. We can hear you, yes. Can you hear us? Ms. Lee, can you hear us?
Now I can. Yes, I can.
Okay, perfect. I was just introducing the speakers, and I will be giving the floor to each one of you in a second. So yeah, welcome everyone. So I will sit down. Join the speakers. I will start with you, Ms. Vasileva. So we're here today to talk about the investment gap between genders. Before that, would you like to comment on the inclusion of women in tech in general, and what is your perspective on this?
So there is a short answer and a longer answer. I'll start with the short. Clearly, there is a lot of room for improvement. And the good news is that there is a lot of work to be done, which is also an opportunity. As always, when there is work to be done, it's an opportunity. So let me elaborate a little bit more. And since we do with a lot of numbers, I'll use some statistics just to exemplify the situation with the gender representation before we speak about the investment gap and the rest. So McKinsey have estimated that about 22% of the tech roles, tech in the widest definition, in Europe are actually only 22% are taken by women. UNESCO also published recently a report that says that globally, women are very much underrepresented in what we call STEM education and careers. And STEM, although I guess everybody knows, stands for science, technology, engineering, and mathematics. Whereas only 28% of the engineering graduates are women. About 22 are dealing with artificial intelligence, and less than 30% of the global workforce at all is actually is women in terms of tech. So I also want to give the example, because it's about science and innovation and engineering at the end of the day, and these are the drivers of innovation and growth in general when we speak about the tech industry. European Commission is exploring in detail the deep tech, companies that are based on important scientific and engineering advances. These are AI, autonomous cars, blockchain, and so on. Only 10% of the patent applications in Europe, if we take this as a good example of the deep tech activity, is women. So, and in Greece, I recently read a report of a venture capital fund in Greece that says that out of 495 startups, I guess you know which this one is actually contains, only 16% contain one woman in their founding team, and unfortunately only 3% are women-led startups. So these statistics do not kind of sound good, you know, they're concerning. And they're one side of the puzzle. The other side of the puzzle is that the minority, and I'll use again the STEM education and profession, and in general higher education in tech industry, is even more, of women is even more acute when it comes to creating, innovating, and basically bringing value-added economic growth. So, and there has been progress, so the gender gap is closing, all statistics are saying that. But it's going to take another 132 years with this speed to close it. And I wish, you know, for our grandparents and their grandchildren and their children, you know, that maybe they will see an equal world. But I would like also for my daughters and for myself to see a better world. So we have to do a lot of things. Bea mentioned, and the previous panel was talking a lot about education. That's a critical role to play, but also we need to, since I'm representing the technology world, we need to make a more women-friendly ecosystem, entrepreneurial ecosystem, and we need to encourage and to make sure that more women like you are actually entering the VCs and the investor circles. That's critical because that helps counter biases, bring to a more balanced approach in investment decisions, harnessing growth of women-led companies so that they can find capital, they can progress, and they can develop. And they can be role models for other entrepreneurs.
Great, thank you for this. I think I agree completely with the women participation in the investment decision-making. The statistics speak for themselves. Overall, in Europe, when there's a woman in the investment team, you have percentages of women representation in founded teams of over 40%. In our portfolio, it is close to that, including members of the LGBTQ community, so numbers speak for themselves. I'll start being a bit more specific and moving into the health tech side and ask Ms. Lee to share with us what was the idea behind WAM and what gap they're trying to fill. Is there a shock needed to the system so we don't have to wait 132 years for equality to come about?
Well, I hope so. First of all, thank you so much for including me in such an incredibly interesting and dynamic conversation. I'm so sorry I'm not there. I'm actually outside of New York City, where I'm based, and a lot of my comments and research at the moment are US-based, but we're looking very much to expand our research and our data to be quite global. But, you know, the US does have obviously a large impact, and especially when it comes to research, because NIH is the largest funder of research on the planet. My background is as a businesswoman, and I, after building a successful business and understanding what happens when 85% of my workforce was female, if they were taken out for taking care of an elderly parent or a child, what the impact was on my bottom line. And that kind of stuck with me over the years, but more importantly, after I was able to sell that business, I started hosting health and wellness conferences for women, because I realized health and wellness conferences, as well as the intersection of health and wealth, understanding that without women having a means to be employed and empowered, their health was, and the health of their family was endangered. Fast forward, and a group of business women also understood the importance of research and developing ideas in science in order to be able to draw that line to the creativity of women starting companies and businesses. And we engaged the RAND Corporation to help us do an economic study, because we were tired, honestly, of talking about under-inclusion, under-representation, understudied women in research. And when you looked at all of the data, women are basically an understudied species. And this creates an impoverished database. You know, we're not a 175-pound white male, and that's how most drugs are tested, for example. So we did this incredible study with RAND, and what we determined were a few things. So just quickly, a small investment in research yields an enormous return to the economy. And what we really wanted was data so that everyone, people, women starting businesses, men sitting and listening, could have the data that showed that this is an economic discussion. This is not just an emotional one. This is not just that women are not included. And in the US, there's still less than 2% of VC money, and less than 1%, frankly, in biopharma. So all of those numbers need to change. We totally agree. But they're only going to change, we feel, if we have data that can show what the economic return is. And so the 4 areas that we studied had an investment of $350 million. And what we learned is that if you doubled that small number, you got a return of $14 billion to the economy. And so we're now running that through a couple of resolutions in Congress. And hopefully that will increase the research dollars that are spent, which we know have an impact worldwide. And I'll stop there.
Great, thank you for sharing the data. It's really impressive, and I would personally love to hear more about how you measure and, of course, how you come to the results. I think it's significant to back our conviction with data. Moving to Dr. Rouchota. Dr. Rouchota, would you like to share with us your experience on the health tech startup scene in Greece as a co-founder of BioNTech? What has been the evolution actually in this region since you first started?
Sure. So first of all, BioNTech was founded back in 2013, but I would say that we really started acting as a company in 2018. Before that, we were more of an academic mentality, so I would count this as a beginning. So I would say that in the last 5 or 6 years, what I have witnessed is that there was still a very robust background on medical devices. So this was one main part. And also healthcare management, which is still very much progressing. But a big switch that I think there is, it's global and it's happening in Greece as well, is towards digital health and wellness apps. And I can see that this is something that is growing all the time, and this is really, really important because now more startups, I think in healthcare, start designing non-invasive monitoring of health parameters, which opens up a whole new field that is very promising and very exciting. And this also allows for people for many different fields to be included in healthcare. So it becomes much wider, both for employees to be included in this sector, but also as we talk about diversity, it becomes more diverse in more opinions that are heard, in more different views that are written down and exploited. So I think the biggest change and a very promising one is that the whole field is becoming wider and including much more fields and people, and so.
Great, thank you for sharing. And staying on the subject of health tech startups, Mr. Zikian, could you comment on what led you to found Omgyno? And what drives you today, and what is the ultimate goal for the company focusing on the reproductive health of women?
Of course, thank you, Mirta, for the question and for the invitation, of course. So I also have a health tech type of company, but we focus on sexual and reproductive health. The company is called Omgyno, and it's about gynecology and female sexuality is kind of really basis of what we do. I grew up in the Middle East. I'm half Greek, I'm half Lebanese. I come from an Armenian background. So basically, I've kind of ventured throughout all these different places where there's a lot of conservatism around female sexuality, and this is a barrier for a lot of women to be able to take care of their health. We see that in these conservative societies, there isn't that much of a push for public health to do something about more awareness regarding sexuality, more awareness about how to take care of your sexual health. And if you look at the countries like the UK, the NHS actually provides home testing, which is a really easy way for someone to take her own test at home without worrying about all the barriers. And when I saw that these initiatives exist around the world, even as private companies in the US, I thought that this could be a really great thing to do. And as a designer who's always focused on social impact, really love doing this kind of cultural research, and really love to see how we can use technology to facilitate these things, I realized that this could be something really innovative to do. So we started the company in 2021 here in Greece, actually. We have a base in Lebanon, a base here, and a base in Portugal. And it's been going really great so far. Of course, we have all the challenges, as you might expect. But yeah, what we're really focusing on is to have this inclusive idea of taking care of your sexual health through a feminist lens. And our 3 pillars are control and agency over your body, and self-care, to learn more about it. So we use a lot of social media to educate, especially younger generations, about it. And of course, to have control over yourself and to have the privacy that you would need to do this kind of work.
Okay, great. So I will actually continue with the second question to you, since you discussed a bit the regional side of things. I want to ask you your opinion about how the region compares to traditional Western economies, both in women actually starting a company, getting access to finance, and building a company, especially with a very specific theme like the one you're handling.
Challenges are what you can expect and more, because you're working with a taboo subject also that a lot of people don't really want to get into. You're also a woman, and in my case, because I come from this human-centered design background where we're more transdisciplinary, so I as a designer am creating something, but I don't come from the medical world myself, that already is a new way of doing things. Integrating social impact and design and technology and healthcare all together is relatively new. So most of the time when I'm speaking to VCs, we already do have VC investment and angel investment, and we do get grants also from much bigger institutions now. But in general, there's always this first level of shock, like, oh, what? Who? So this is what I have to deal with mostly. And to be fair, there aren't really that many others around me that I could speak to. So there are definitely a lot of barriers, because mostly there aren't that many that are doing this kind of work around. But I do believe that over time we are seeing, from at least from the audience and from the user's perspective, that this is something that is very much needed.
Okay, great. Dr. Ruchota, did you face challenges when you were raising your first funds back in 2019? What were the lessons learned at the time, and how did you face it as a female founder?
To start with the options that there are out there here in Greece, I would say that there are 3 main ways of getting funded. The first one would be to have a European grant that would fund your research, especially in the scientific field, but I think this is broader. The second one would be to have a national funding, and the third one would be to have a venture capital or angel. I can say that we have tried all 3 of them, so I can share some experience on that. Starting from the European projects, this is something very nice, especially if you know how to elaborate on your ideas, you can easily get funded. But the truth is, at the end of the day, that you cannot really have a real business without real revenues coming just from European grants. The second option, that is from national funds, there the main problem is that the most common way that this works is that you get approved for the funding, then you have to invest the whole capital by yourself. So that means that you have a very big capital in the bank waiting for such a job. And then when you go on with your project, then you get the funds. This is for a startup. I think it's not realistic, so I wouldn't even put it as an option in this discussion. And the third one is a venture capital, which I think it's the only real solution for growth for a company. So we were very lucky to get Metavalon, you might have heard of this, to fund us. And this really boosted our company and changed our mentality as well. So I think these are the ways. Now for the challenges, I will run the risk of changing the context a bit. I think the biggest challenge is to be well prepared to be able to recognize an opportunity, because opportunities are always out there, so you must have a very clear idea of where you want to go, and only when you do have this, you are able to recognize an opportunity. And I think it's also the key point when you want to go to a venture capital because you have to convince some business people that your idea is really worth it and that there is profit out of it. So I think the greatest challenge for women, but also for men, is to be very well prepared for what they want to achieve in this kind of business.
Mm-hmm. Okay, great. Going back to Ms. Lee and her research, we've heard some experiences from the ground entrepreneurs in the region looking for funding. Would you like to share with us a little bit more about what the data actually shows and the results of the WAM report?
I'd be delighted. So there were basically 4 areas that we studied, and they're actually universal around the world in terms of their effects on women. And we picked these different areas because they affect women differentially, exclusively, or predominantly. So, for example, heart disease is the #1 killer of women around the globe. Even so, at National Institutes of Health, for example, only 4% of their budget is allocated to studying women, specifically with heart disease, when we know it's a different disease in men and women. And, you know, it's so interesting because what's happening with WAM is that many startups are starting to contact us because they realize that we have data that can be helpful to them in preparing for the documentation that they need to provide and the presentation that they need to do within the VC community. And that's very exciting to us because we want to be, as a not-for-profit, very helpful in that way. And the other areas, for example, are autoimmune disease, which affect 80% women, yet only 7% of the budget at NIH is allocated to studying autoimmune disease, which is crazy. Alzheimer's, which we all know is 2/3 women in the US, and women around the globe are twice as likely to have Alzheimer's as men, and yet only 12% is allocated to studying women. So, and then cancer, of course, lung cancer is the #1 killer of cancer, more than ovarian, cervical, and uterine cancer combined. And very few of us are aware of that and even know what the preventive or diagnostic strategies are. So there's much work that needs to be done in terms of making sure that women are very much taken care of, because at the end of the day, women drive economies. And if you look at the US economy, for example, we're 50% of the workforce, 52% of the population. We own 60% of the wealth in this country. We make 85% of the spending, which was $20 trillion last year, and we make 80% of the healthcare decisions. And some of these numbers are correspond to European nations as well. Obviously not as developed, but the fact is that there are tremendous parallels. And if you take into account that women drive economies, and if the economy is healthy, obviously, therefore, if the research is more prolific, what you have is a healthier society, healthier families, and at the end of the day, a much greater economic return.
Decisions are taken by women. However, we also heard about what percentage of funding goes to them. Back over to you, Ms. Vasilova. Why is it important then to kind of that women do get their proper share of funding, and how can they get to that?
Well, I mean, I very much kind of associate and link what I'm going to say to what we already heard. So apparently, women drive they need to get funding because there is a significant economic impact. And that's why it's not just closing the gap in funding and investment. It's not just because it is the good thing to do, the right thing to do. It is also because it's been proven that female-led startups are producing more revenues, higher return on investment, so coming back to the hardcore economics. And those that have higher than the average diversity ratio, let's put it this way, in their management team, they also produce, actually they report higher revenues associated to innovation. So it does have economic impact. I think it's a very famous study by Boston Consulting Group that says that for every $1 of funding, a female-founded startup with at least so not entirely female-led team, but let's say at least one woman in the team, is producing 78 cents of revenue, whereas the male-led startup is producing 31. Numbers speaks for themselves. I mean, I do work great with, male colleagues. It's all about diversity. It's all about diversity of thought. It's all about, embedding different perspectives into decisions, into your ideas, into basically how you pursue things. No one knows it all. So it does have a core psychological value, social value, and economic value. So that's why we need to close the funding gap. So how we do it is the $1 million question. We speak about investment here, so I will leave aside the educational institutions, the government that have a major role to play, also the family environment, because biases are there, barriers are there. So, my colleagues here on stage are witnessing. I've been a mentor since 2012, very actively working with startups, including social impact startups, not only tech startups. So overcoming bias is essential, including more women into the investment decisions. I will repeat again, bring to more inclusive investments, to broader range. So you're representative of a VC, you know how important it is basically to have women, but also for innovations and innovation hubs and acceleration programs. So these are the entry levels, into the investment cycle. So we run the Visa Innovation Program Europe, but also we know many others. Women tend to be shy to apply and, to declare themselves as entrepreneurs. So you have to proactively pursue them. You have to, take them by the hand and show them that it's not scary. And you're there to support with mentorship, with funding, with education, with role models, with connections to the external world. It's so important, the contact of, the contact networks, to direct them to the women-led investors. So this has been kind of my social mission also. Not only that I work for a company like Visa, which is very equal and, diversity is like thriving, but also as a person and also as a mother, I am really committed to be role modeling. It's a heavy duty, basically, because we all work a lot, and we need to do that in our very scarce spare time, if at all. But we have to role model. We need to show and to encourage for these women to stand up, fight for what they want to achieve, become role models, and inspire the rest to follow. So it's very difficult. It takes everyone. To basically all the players in the economy, starting from the nationals, the supranationals, the private companies. In Visa, and I'm not shy by saying that. I'm extremely lucky. I used to be a banker before that, and I was the only one sitting on the board of directors of a very big bank, a woman. Everybody else was men. At Visa, we do everything possible to promote diversity, not only of gender, but also of thought. 42% of our global workforce is women. We have a policy which says equal pay for equal work. And I have to say that we are measured by a very strict diversity scorecard metric. And we have to implement measures to proactively recruit, retain, and develop women. Collaborate with a lot of NGOs, run a lot of platforms like Visa She's Next, showcasing again, showcasing the example of successful women entrepreneurs, and not so successful, because failure is part of this. And these women here next to me, they've been through a lot of difficulties, like we've all been. So, and in Greece in particular, and with that I'll finish, with the Visa Innovation Program, which is an incredible stage, we are promising, and it's an internal promise to us that we run the program. We run it with Endeavor, with a VC like you, that we're going to be proactively encouraging women to apply. We are dedicated to secure mentorship from women, and of course to showcase and to promote leading examples of women-founded companies.
So going a bit off key here. Sorry, do you want to add something? Or?
No, not right now.
Okay, cool. So going a bit off key, are you getting pushback from the status quo? So from the men who are feeling that diversity scorecards or their status quo is being threatened, or they're being...
Or personally? Personally,
you can answer how you wish.
Well, I wouldn't say so. Although, you know, at Visa, it's like, we're incredibly lucky to work for this company. Maybe you need to ask some of the men, you know, from the team how they feel. But everything has to be balanced. Everything has to be human at the end of the day. But in previous careers, of course, it's the finance world is a male's world. Still. I mean, I don't need to quote because you already said, in Europe, from the deep tech companies that are quarter of all the startup community, and they're valued for 2022 at 700 billion euros, 2% is going to women teams. If this is not bias, and it's the vicious circle, so no funding, no possibility to develop, it's actually depriving the tech industry of the diversity of creativity and innovation.
Absolutely. So let's see how we can push on that and each one from their perspective make changes fast. Going back to Dr. Rouchota, so let's talk about diverse themes, because I don't think that when we're talking about women, entrepreneurship and participation, financial, both inclusion and the funding, we're talking about women-only teams. So what are the advantages of working in a diverse team, and what do you see the day-to-day differences?
I think I'll start with two things that I liked that you said, that everything is human in the end, and that when we talk about diversity, it's about diversity of thought mostly, not gender, because usually we say diversity and our minds go to gender, ethnic background, social background. But in truth, I think that diversity means variety. So what you need is a diversity of different personalities, different opinions. And what I've seen, at least in my team with 12 people, is that when you mix people from different scientific backgrounds and different ways of expressing, what you get is a boost of creativity, you get a reduction of competition, and it also facilitates a lot initiatives. And in the end, all these lead to better quality of solutions. So I think this is the major advantage in the end, on a daily basis as well. But this asks for acceptability, of open-mindedness, inclusivity. So in order to have all these advantages, it's really important to have people welcoming different thoughts. And I say that for a team that is working in a laboratory where creativity is really forbidden, because everything needs to be like a standard operating procedure and everything. So I can only imagine what this means in social sciences or art or places like that.
Great. So, Mr. Tikian, your executive team and your leadership team is made up by a lot of women. What would you say are the three things we should be focusing on to accelerate women-led startups in healthcare, in both getting more funding, being more successful, and acting as role models that Ms. Vasileva talked about?
I was just thinking about that question and about what my colleague here said, and if the problem is really about shyness. And I really start to think more about whether this is something that we tell ourselves or it is the truth, because there is a lot of bias. And I know a lot of younger women throughout the years that I've been an entrepreneur where they have made moves to try to be an entrepreneur, but the culture around them hasn't really facilitated that. And I wouldn't say that they're shy. It's just that how much will you take before you just give up? And this is something that I think is one of the really major barriers. So for support to really be there, you really have to value the work that a woman entrepreneur does, and not to tokenize her also just because she's a woman entrepreneur. I mean, you end up sometimes being in all of these different panels, and you're there as a female entrepreneur because you are female, but quite often I find myself in these spaces where they are mostly male-dominated, and I'm part of so many different accelerators over time. And I know that I'm still fitting that box in many cases. Like, no one's really actually looking that step deeper, even with the support. So that's one thing that I would like to really focus on, is that you need to find networks, to have access to networks that really value your work, and not just the fact that you are a tokenized woman, a little, percentage in the statistic. And for us personally, how I could say is that when we first started doing what we were doing, and we were like, oh, this is such a shocking thing, no one's really doing that, and just constantly being tokenized. It wasn't until we actually we applied and won to be part of MIT Solve, which is like the social impact aspect of the social impact platform of MIT, and through them we won awards from Johnson & Johnson Foundation and from Vodafone Americas, and suddenly people were like, oh, so now that all of these big foundations in the US have given credit to your work, now we will want you even more. And so I think this is something that we really need to focus on, and really show that the support is really needed from a serious valued perspective, and not just because you're female. And of course, the other two, which I would say have been very helpful for me, is that support through mentorship, through others that have been in your place, that understand what you're doing. So mentorship and capacity building I find very, very important, especially within the right circumstances. So not just your typical figure out how to make a business model, but have something that is more catered to your needs. And of course, at the end of the day, nothing is possible without funding. So we need to make sure that we do have access to funding, and the certain measures are there, because also funding just from any VC isn't always the best idea either, because I've also been in a situation where we have had funding from pretty much an all-male VC, and then suddenly after you get the money, the expectations are also a bit different. So yeah, these are the three things that I would focus on.
Great. So let's stick to funding. I think the theme of like having more women in investment decisions and investment committees, also part of the boards, part of your advisors and mentorships, comes again and again. And I think it's an important one to see how we can support that. Let's stick to VC though. Ms. Lee, how can VCs and investors in general use the WAM report? You mentioned some of the startups are coming to you to use your data to support their pitches, to support the case they're making, to maybe investors that don't know as much on the subject. What can investors use, and how can they use your work?
So there are a number of different ways. And first of all, congratulations to my peers on this panel, because, and especially to Visa, when you have companies that recognize not only the value, the importance, and the contributions that women are making, the environment fosters creativity and collaboration on a totally different level. And so I think there is still a tremendous amount globally of discrimination, unintended and intended, and sometimes very subtle. But the fact is that does discourage many women from being entrepreneurs. I am an entrepreneur. I built a company that was a global brand. I had the pleasure of selling it to Luxottica a number of years ago. So I understand all of the difficulties, frustrations, and challenges that come with being an entrepreneur. But I also understand that if you have the right ecosystems around you, and those are, as have been pointed out, not only mentors, but different collaborations and organizations that can be supportive. And today, fortunately, with the internet and with social media, we're able to figure out who can be a mentor, who can be a collaborator, where I can reach out, as the last panelist just mentioned, in terms of receiving funding from MIT or wherever. So all of these things are incredibly important. And at WAM, what we've created is a data-driven discussion, a data-driven platform, so that we're not talking about we're understudied, we're underrepresented, we're undervalued. That I really wanted very much to change that dialogue to say, here's the data. This is an economic issue. You support women in business, you support women in research, your returns are, as have also just been pointed out, exaggerated and enlarged. And it doesn't matter male, female, these are the returns. And so to me, it's more a question of being focused on the actual data to make it less of an emotional discussion and more of an objective one. And we're all data driven. So as business people, if you look at that, why wouldn't you make that investment in research? Why wouldn't you make that investment as a VC? And I do think that the VC community is becoming, and I think we're obviously a global community, and need to have more of these kinds of discussions so that we can be supportive from wherever we are around the globe. But the VC community, there are many, many more women entering into it, because we realize that without more women being involved and being part of that ecosystem, change will be slower. At WHAM, we're very focused on bringing together all different proponents of the ecosystem. So that could be policy, academia, business, advocacy. Because if you don't get everyone around the table, you're just talking within a tunnel or within a void, and you're talking to yourselves. You need to have that diversity. Women bring diversity, as was pointed out, not only to the boardroom, to business, and to the results that can be had by making investments in them.
Great, thank you for this. We're coming to the end of the discussion. I would just like all of you to make one final comment. I'll start with you, Ms. Tunikian.
Oh, me.
Sure.
Just want to say thank you for this, and I really appreciate that. I mean, I didn't know much about this forum, I'll be completely honest, before I came here, and I'm quite surprised as to the level of discussions that we've been having, so I'm just very grateful to be here, and please check us out, omgyno.com.
Will do. Dr. Ruchota?
Great. No, just to say that I really enjoyed the discussion. Thank you for the great questions, and I think it was really worthwhile having this talk.
Ms. Vasileva?
We can do it. It's as simple as that. United we stand, diversity will rule the world.
And one final comment from you, Ms. Lee, if you will.
Just, first of all, a big gratitude for bringing together such extraordinary thought leaders. I think through the passion, energy, and drive of these women, we can create change. But it will take all of us working together.
Yeah, I think collaboration is key. Sharing discussion, sharing resources, sharing people in our networks is also key. Also sharing stories. We talked about role models. I think it's very important to share stories and share them in a genuine, authentic, and vulnerable way, so not be afraid of the vulnerability. I think women competing in startups, building companies, working in different conditions, also having different responsibility as wives, as mothers, as carers of elderly, etc., do have a difficult challenge ahead of them. And nothing's perfect. There's no perfect balance. We just need to be around, support each other, and make sure that we can do it. It's not going to be perfect, but we're around to support each other. Thank you all for listening and being here with us. Thank you to the speakers and to Women on Top for
It's a pleasure. Thank you.